Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video we're going to be doing a Learn DaVinci Resolve in 30 minutes video. So hopefully I'll be able to take you through the process of creating your first project, adding materials to it, editing it, and getting to where we can export the video in the Deliver tab of Resolve. So hopefully this should take under 30 minutes. That's what I'm going to try to aim for. So let's go ahead and get started. When you first open DaVinci Resolve on your computer, the first thing you're going to be presented with is the project selection screen. You can see here I have a bunch of previous projects I've been working on. You can see their resolution and their frame rate. That's how many images per second of video. So you can select from old projects by double clicking on them. But if you want to go ahead and start a brand new project, there's a new project button at the bottom of this window. So go ahead and hit that and then give it a title. So I'm going to call it Learn DaVinci Resolve 15 in 30 minutes. And I'll end it with the real one just so it's separate from that previous project I had opened. So I'm going to hit create here. And the first thing it's going to present you with is the Edit tab of DaVinci Resolve 15. So this is where you will do most of your timeline editing. If you're doing anything like adding titles on, video transitions, or making cuts, that all occurs on the Edit tab, so it's probably where you're going to spend the majority of your time. To the left of the Edit tab, looking at the bottom of our screen, is the Media tab. If we go over to the Media tab, this tab is dedicated to bringing materials into your project. You can actually drag and drop from Windows File Explorer to the Media pool in the Edit tab to add videos to your timeline, so the Media tab isn't required. But this allows you to navigate, say, different folders or directories that exist on your computers. The next three tabs we won't really cover much in this video since it's just a quick guide for beginners. But just so you have an idea for the future, the Fusion tab allows you to create 3D special effects and can be quite complicated, having a system of nodes that connect into each other in order to generate a final effect and render that. The Color tab is for color grading, so if you want to add a film look to your video, you can use these LUTs, drop them on top of a video clip. And by using these lookup tables, you can modify the color of your video clips without really playing too much with the settings down here, which can be used to create your own lookup tables. The Fairlight tab is when you want to do audio editing, such as voiceovers and post-production. And then the final tab is the Deliver tab, where you can render your video. So for this guide, we're going to be focused on the Media tab, the Edit tab, and the Deliver tab. So to show one thing you can use the Media tab for, you have this section called the Media Storage over here on the left. If you ever don't see it, look at the top and you'll be able to find one of these windows that I'm talking about. If it's not highlighted in white, that means that it's currently closed. So if I wanted to open something like the clone tool, you click on that, it turns white and the window pops up. So in the media storage, we can save locations on our computer or our network where we tend to store video files or other assets that we might want to bring into our video projects. So if you have a folder where you save a lot of your raw materials, then you can right click somewhere in this area and do add new location to find that. So here I'll go find my stock clips folder and I will select that. So for instance, I have a folder on my D drive called /videos, and in here I have videos I've published, but also stock clips that we can bring in order to do a basic video here. So as you can see, I have a lot of videos, and the majority of these are being pulled off of videos.pexels.com, which is a really cool source if you're looking for stock footage, by the way. And we can kind of select from these what we want to actually edit in our timeline. So you can left click on one of these videos and it'll pop up in the preview window over here. So you can kind of go through it and see if there's any video footage that you actually want to use in your project. So hitting play here, can see that there's a few cuts going back between different shots of a lake. But maybe for now I'm more interested in doing a nighttime video. So I'll drag this Sydney night time lapse into my media pool. And you may get a pop-up message which says the clips have a different frame rate than the current project settings. And if you hit change here, it's going to change the project frame rate to match whatever video you're importing. So if you want to know what frame rate your project is currently in or to change the settings, go up to File and Project Settings. And you should change this before you drop any video clips in, because once you have any video in the media bin, then you won't be able to change the timeline frame rate anymore. But you can get rid of all the clips if you want to edit it. So 30 frames per second is pretty standard if you're editing something like a YouTube video, so I'm going to leave it there. If you want to know what the frame rate of the video clip you want to import is, then you can select it here and then click on metadata. Making sure that you double click on that to kind of open it up on the side panel here. You can scroll down and find settings related to the video. So here you can see that this video clip was recorded in 23.976 FPS. and it has a 1920 by 1080 resolution. Your video clip doesn't necessarily have to match your timeline resolution, though generally if you mix and match your frame rates, it might look a little weird in the end, but most people probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So I'm going to drag this in and not change the video frame rate. But before we start editing, I'll grab a couple more clips that are related to city night times. So I've grabbed a couple more clips and I've added them down here to our media bin. So with these clips here, I can go over to the edit tab and we'll be able to see the media pool here, except that now we're on the edit tab, we can basically select these and drag them to our timeline, or set in out points and add in only portions of the video to our timeline. So to make it more visual, I'm going to change this from a list mode to a thumbnail mode for you guys. We can also increase the size of these thumbnails so that they're nice and big. And I'll start adding some of these clips into the timeline. So the first way we'll do it is just dragging the entire clip onto the timeline. You can do that by left click, hold, and drag it on. And then that'll take the full clip in all its length. You can left click on it, move it around the timeline. So another way that we can add materials onto our timeline, but cutting away the edges of what we don't want, is to double click on a video, which will pop open in this preview window. And then you can find a portion of the video that you like, basically where you want to set an end point to have be the start. So let's just say right around here arbitrarily. So to set the endpoint, I hit I on my keyboard, and what you'll notice is that after that, a gray line appears that's a lighter shade than the dark areas. And then I can go to the part of the timeline by left click and dragging to find where I want to set my out point, where the video clip's going to end at, and I hit O. Now if I move the timeline cursor by left click and dragging, I can find where I want to add the video clip onto, and I can hit insert clip or F9 on the keyboard. So now you'll notice that even though the original video clip was 18 seconds long, this part that we took out of that using in out points is much shorter. So if you ever have in out points set on either a video clip in your media pool or in the timeline, you can reset these assuming you have the default key bindings for DaVinci Resolve by doing Alt X. That will reset both the in and the out. You can do Alt N to reset the in and Alt O to reset the out. So Alt N resets the in. You see how it extends back to the start of the clip now. And Alt O removes the out, which basically resets it back to normal. So if you're not using default key bindings, you can find them up in the mark menu, by the way. So clear in, clear out, and clear in and out. So now we have a couple clips on our video timeline. So if you have a video clip in your timeline and it's not using 100% of the source material, what you can actually do is left click on one of the edges of that clip and pull it outwards in order to expand the video, basically make your clip in the timeline longer. And you'll notice that when you do this, that there is a white box around your clip, and that shows the start time of the source material and the end time of the source material. So if I try to drag it past that, I can't. We'll get a red line there. So that shows we've dragged the clip in the timeline to the end of the source material. Another way that we can adjust the length of our video clip is to use the blade edit mode tool. So right here you can see it's B on the keyboard, or you can click on it at the bar on the top of your timeline. So if you find a clip that you want to separate into two clips, simply grab the blade tool and then left click on the timeline at the spot where you want to make your cut. So this is going to split one clip into two clips. And when they're two separate clips, that means that you can drag them on the timeline individually. So although the source material might have originally connected to this source material, I could drag this clip to the right side and I could put this clip in between. Note that you can have them snap together very easily by having snapping enabled on your timeline as well. So now if we go ahead and play back our video, it'll look a little bit like this, where we have the first clip, it jumps to the second clip, and then after a long period of time, which we'd probably want to shorten, it jumps back to the first clip. So let's say that this middle clip here is too long. It's kind of boring for the viewer. So we're going to shrink that. So I'm going to left click on the edge of this clip, drag it inwards, and we can move everything to the right of it over here as well. Now we could do this one clip at a time, and that would be a pain. But a quicker way that we can eliminate the gap between videos, which is currently black space, is to right click on that gap and do a ripple delete. So if we choose ripple delete here, every clip that is past that black space gets pushed over so that it's connected with the earlier clips. By doing that, you can keep all of your clips tightly together and it'll look like a proper video. Okay, so let's add some video footage from this third clip over here. So I'm going to double click on it, which will pop it over in the preview. Find something I like the first few seconds. add my in out points and drag it onto the timeline. And let's swap this position with the one on the left over here. So I'm gonna left click and drag this over here to the right so that it's on the right hand side. Another way we can do this, if you have really long clips and you don't have any space to put it on the right hand side, can be you can just temporarily drag it onto video track 2. So you see how when I drag this up, it automatically creates video track 2. You can have as many video tracks or audio tracks as you want in your project. And that's really useful because you usually want to separate things like your spoken audio with your music or your video with your titles that lay on top of it. Another way you can have more space to work around with here is to take this little zoom bar at the top of your timeline and zoom in and out. So by doing that, you can shrink and expand your timeline so that you can look at as much or as little of your video footage as you want at one time. So I'm just gonna pull this over here and then pull the video clip to the right that I want to be on the left. And I'm going to put this Sydney clip over at the end. So now we have 2 shots of the first clip and 2 other separate clips in between. So at the start of your video, you're usually going to want there to be some kind of mild transition as your video comes into view, such as fading from black into the full picture. You may also want a title to introduce your video. So the quickest way that you can do a video transition is to click on your video clip, and at the top left hand or top right hand corner, top left hand for fade from, and then fade out is the top right. You can left click on these little notches and drag them over for whatever duration you want. So if it says +1:00 means +1 second, +1 and 10 means 1 second 10 frames. So we can make it a 1 second fade from black transition by leaving it at 1 second. And now if we go to the start of our timeline and we hit space, you'll notice that there's a really easy fade from black transition now. Another way that we can add in video transitions, basically the way you do anything but that, is to go over to your toolbox. So find video transitions. If you don't see the toolbox, then you need to open the effects library here, top left hand corner. And you can see all of the video transitions that DaVinci Resolve has for you out of the box. So for instance, I could do something like have it slide onto the screen by taking the slide motion transition and dropping this on top of our video clip. So if we drop it onto the left side, obviously that means it's going to transition at the start of the video. If we drop that between 2 clips, that's going to mean that it'll transition from one clip to a second clip. So let's put that at the start there. And now if we hit play, we're going to see it slide onto the screen. So personally, I don't like that much. So let's grab something else like a Vintian blinds wipe. I'm going to drag this onto the original video transition, and that'll simply replace it. So now if I try to play it back from the start of the timeline, it'll look like that. Now just to note, you can actually combine this with that fade from black transition that you can do just by bringing the notch tab over. So I could drag this over here to the right and then go back to the video transition. And then not only is it going to have the Vintian blinds, but it's also going to be fading in slowly. So depending on what you like, that might look even better. So if you want to edit anything about the effects you drop onto your video clips, you can left click on them and open the inspector in the top right hand corner. And here you'll be able to see the effect that you dropped on and information about it. So for instance, if you wanted to have a feather border on the edge of these blinds, you could do that by checking feather and bringing the border over a little bit. So for right now, I'll remove the fade from black effect so that you can obviously see this. And you'll notice that it kind of blurs around the edges of these blinds a little bit. So if I hit space here, it's no longer a solid black box that's shrinking, but it's a box that also has a blur on the edges. So I can go back down, I can shrink that or increase it if I want it to be more dramatic. And I can also change things like the angle of the blinds effect. So if I don't want the blinds to be from bottom to top, I could change the angle on this 90 degrees, and it could be from left to right instead. Adding in a ease, such as ease in and ease out, will make it slow at the start and the end, but faster in the middle. So changing the speeds really easily there. Let's try that. So you can see now how it has a smooth slide rather than just a linear progression from one side of the screen to the right. And we could add back on our fade from black. So now it can look something like this. So I think that looks pretty cool now. So what we might want to add to this video is a little title over it. So in the toolbox, still in the effects library, we can access some of the titles that DaVinci Resolve has by default. So if you want a simple title, stick to this titles box up here. But the Fusion titles are those that would be created in the Fusion tab. So that's the thing I was talking about over here, which can get kind of complicated. But you have a lot of pre-generated titles from that you can actually modify a bit. So I would recommend starting with these. And we can drag them onto our timeline. But to show you a little bit more about how you can customize your titles yourself, I'm going to drag a text plus element into the video clip. So I'm putting this above video track 1 on video track 2, and that'll make it so that video track 2 will show on top of video track 1. So like that, you can see the title sits on top of the background footage, which is almost always what you want. And we can adjust the position of this title by moving it along the timeline, just like you would with any normal video clip. So with this title, we can give the video a title. Maybe we could call it Resolve in 30 minutes. Now you can see that this text is going off screen. That's going to look really bad. So what we might want to do is decrease the size. So scrolling down here in the inspector, the inspector always allows you to edit settings for videos, video clips, audio, whatever settings you want to do. That's usually in the inspector, by the way. So let's decrease the size of this. Overall, that looks pretty good, but I like to use a font called Big Noodle Titling. So I'm going to change it to that, which will allow me to increase the size a little bit more. It's a very compact title font. I think it works good for stuff like this. And overall, that looks good, but you might notice it's a little bit hard to read that with the background. So there's a lot of ways you could go about making it so that your title is more visible. One way would be to take your video clip on the bottom, so Sydney night time lapse, and decrease the opacity. So I could drop that down to like 32. You can also make that temporary, by the way. So with the opacity, if we lower this down, it's only going to be showing a percentage of the video clip, basically corresponding with whatever number out of 100 we set here for the opacity. So whatever's behind the video clip is going to be basically just a black background. So that's why it looks so dark here, because you're seeing like 73% of the black background and 28% of the video clip on top. Now, making it dark here like this obviously makes it really easy to read the white text. But we can actually animate this opacity over time. So we can have it set to 27.83 here. And we set that as a keyframe, basically what the value should be at a very specific point in time. By left-clicking on this diamond and making it red, that sets a keyframe point. And now we can go over here to where we want the video clip to be completely faded in, and we change the value. So if I set that to 100, a keyframe is automatically created, and at this point in time, the opacity is 100%. So now everything between those two keyframes is going to animate that value over time. So if I go here to where it was set to 28, and I hit play, you'll notice that the video clip kind of fades in over time until it reaches 100% opacity. And what's great about these keyframes is you can do it not only for opacity, but pretty much anything that you see a diamond here, you can animate using that technique. So if you want to have the video zoom out or zoom in over time, if you want to change the position, if you want to crop one of the sides, but only for a couple seconds, you can do all of that in DaVinci Resolve. Keyframes are amazing. So let's make this title look a little bit better still. So over here on the right, I probably want the title to kind of fade out. I don't want it to just instantly disappear from the screen like that. So just like with the video clips, you can have them fade in or fade out by clicking on the white notches in the top right or top left-hand corner. So I can make it a 20 frame animation of a fade out by dragging that over 20 frames, and I hit space, and then it kind of fades out rather than just instantly disappearing. I could do the same thing over on the left, so let's take a look at how that might look. Yeah, not too bad. So fade effects usually tend to be pretty good simply because they're very subtle. They don't catch your eye that much when you're transitioning from one thing to another, but it allows people to focus on everything else that's going on the screen. Okay, so we can also add in a fade effect between two video clips. So of course, if you only want to fade one clip, this tab technique works really well. But if you want to go from one clip to another clip, a better way is to right-click on the border between those and do a cross-dissolve of a set number of frames. So generally 15 or 30 frames works really well. If you add that in, it's going to automatically create the effect. And now if we play it back, we can fade between the clips. If you get any slowdown while you're playing it back in the timeline, don't worry too much about that, because when you actually export it, it should play back at full speed. But having this fade between the two clips makes it smooth the transition a lot more than just having a sharp jump like over here on the right, where it just instantly switches cameras. Now that doesn't mean you never want a sharp jump. It kind of depends on what you're trying to create. Okay, so one more thing we might want to do with our video is to take it and add some music to it. So I'm going to grab something from Kevin MacLeod on incompetech.com and drag this into my video here. Well, more specifically, the media pool. And if I want to add this onto our video, then we probably want to put it in audio track 2 or 3. So I'm going to drag the track down here. So now we have our music, and we can actually edit the track in the same way, more or less, that we can edit the video tracks. So if I wanted to, I can take this slice tool, and if we zoom out here, you can see that the music goes on for much, much longer than our video here. So I can actually go to the end of the timeline here and make a cut right around there. And using the selection tool, A on the keyboard, I can take the rest of this music track, delete it. And by doing that, it'll make sure that the timeline doesn't go on way longer than the video. But now if I go to the end of our video track and I hit play, the audio still is a little longer than the video, but the ending is kind of abrupt. So you can see how both of them are just ending immediately. And when you cut the audio, the music like that, it's probably going to sound bad. So what you should do with the music is you should try to have it fade out. So you can click on the notch and drag that out to have a simple fade out transition. And we can do the same with the video clip here. Up to you whether you want the music or the video to end first. So if you want the video clip to end after the music, you could adjust the length of this music clip. So let's see how that ends now with fade out effects. Okay, and that should look a lot better than just abruptly ending, especially with the audio there. So as things stand out now, we have a pretty functional video. It has fade in, fade out, a title sequence. It has a music soundtrack added in the background. What might still be lacking here, though, is having some voiceover narration, because right now it's kind of just like a video slideshow. So if you want to record your own voiceovers, then what you should do is go over to the Fairlight tab, and we'll be recording extra audio on top of audio track 3. So Fairlight tab allows us to edit audio. If we expand the mixer in the bottom right hand corner, we'll be able to see audio track 3. And I click on no input and go to input in order to set a microphone. So audio input is going to be my 2 USB audio device patched to audio 3 left and audio 3 right. You can use whichever tracks you want. So patching those together will allow us to record on audio track 3. So in order to queue it up for recording, I simply need to hit the record button here. And now you can see that my voice shows levels on audio track 3. So that's how you know it's working. And then we can go over to a part of the video where we actually want to record voiceovers for. And we can hit this record button, which is actually going to record audio to our tracks as we have them set up. So if I hit record here, you'll notice that it starts recording audio and it writes it straight onto audio track 3. Now be careful about doing your recordings though, because if you have it set on a track where you already have audio, it will actually overwrite that audio. Now that doesn't mean if I was to cut away part of the music track, I couldn't reverse it by deleting the capture and then expanding the music clip out back to its original location. But you will do a little damage if you record over stuff that you already wanted to keep. So for that reason, it's best to use a separate audio track, such as audio track 3. Okay, now let's try recording something for real here. So I'll cue it up right around here as the title goes in, and I'll say something like, resolve in 30 minutes. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys DaVinci Resolve in 30 minutes or less. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording track for audio 3, unmute my microphone, and hit play to see how it sounds with that recording actually added into audio track 3. So let's hit play here. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys DaVinci Resolve in 30 minutes or less. So at this point, I think I've shown you guys most of the basics of how you edit a video, piecing things together, adding transitions, adding titles in, and keyframing animation effects using properties like opacity, and you can also use zoom position in the same way that I showed you before, adding in music and adding in voiceovers. So at this point, I'm going to show you guys how you can export your video. So go over to the Deliver tab, which is on the right over here. And you're going to see your entire timeline here. In most cases, you're going to want to export your entire timeline. So where it says render entire timeline, make sure that that's set to entire timeline and not in out range, unless you want to export only part of your video, in which case you can set in out points by hitting IO, which will automatically change the render to in out range, but I'm going to set that back to entire timeline. And your render settings are going to be up in the top left-hand corner. So in most cases, you can just pretty much click on YouTube 180p, and that's going to be more or less fine. So this will give you the default settings of a QuickTime.move video with the .h.264 codec. Works pretty fine, compresses nicely. And this should default to the frame rate of your project for the export frame rate and the resolution that you want to export. If you want this to be less than a 1080p resolution video, you can click on this and drop it down to 720p or up to 2160p, which I think is just another name for 4K resolution. Quality, in most cases, you can have that restrict to 10,000 kbs per second and be fine. There's not too many circumstances where you would need to lower the quality of your video down, but if file size is really important, you can consider reducing this number or choosing automatic, but with a lower quality than best. But if file size doesn't matter, you probably don't need to play around with these settings much down here. So if you want to change the format instead of .move to be an MP4 video, then you can click on the format dropdown and make that a MP4 file. Probably MP4 and QuickTime.move are kind of the more popular formats out there right now. So I would stick with those two unless you have a specific reason to use a different format. For audio, usually you would just have that set to AAC audio codec here. You can increase the data bit rate if you need to. I find that leaving the data bit rate to 192 kbs per second is fine. But if you have a very high quality audio recording or you are importing music that was recorded and exported with a higher data rate, you might consider increasing that as well. Over on File tab, we can set the file name for our video. So by default, it'll have the name of your timeline. So I never renamed our timeline here. So that's why it's going to have the custom name of just timeline 1. But if you ever want to rename your timeline, then you can go up here to the timeline menu. Oh, I guess you have to do it from the edit tab. So you can go up to the timeline menu and do find current timeline in media pool. And now you can just double click on the name here to rename it. So final edit. And then hit enter, and you'll see that reflects up here in the timeline selector. And if we go back over to the deliver tab, it won't actually update the file name and the render until you were to choose the settings again. So I could either manually change the name here of the file, or I could click on YouTube 180p again, and then that will update the file name. But yeah, double check that before you add the render queue, you have the settings you want. So if you want it to be basically the YouTube defaults, but as an MP4, I could select MP4 here, and rather than having to change it every time, I can click on these three dots over here in render settings and save as a new preset. So I could say YouTube 180p MP4, well, I meant MP4, but you get the idea. So we saved a custom preset, and now we can click on that whenever we want this, but saved as an MP4 format. So anyway, on the File tab, make sure that your custom file name is what you want it to be on your computer. And then we can finally choose the location where we want videos to publish. So you can hit Browse and find a location on your computer. I already have it set where I want it to be, so I will hit Add to Render Queue. And that's going to take whatever settings we have down here, so entire timeline, add that queued up to be published as a new video using the settings we just created, and we simply hit the Start Render button in order to start exporting our video. So this will export it to the location that we set with the file name we set and the format we set. So usually exporting in DaVinci Resolve is pretty quick. If you have a longer video or one with more complicated animations, obviously that's going to take longer to render. In this case, we have it done in 21 seconds. So I can open the file location, double click to open the video and play it back. Hello everybody, Chris here. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you guys DaVinci Resolve in 30 minutes or less. So hopefully you guys get the idea. That's how you can go ahead and create a video in DaVinci Resolve 15. I hope that this video has helped you guys walk through the process of doing basic video editing using Resolve 15. I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my future video content.